I came for my son.
Your son? You still don't know, do you?
The night Ryan returned, rain was tapping against Grace Miller's kitchen window the same way it had tapped against the world on the night everything changed. Grace was standing alone beneath a weak yellow light, holding an old photograph of two people who once looked happy enough to survive anything. In the picture, she was younger, softer, smiling with the full trust of a woman who had not yet learned what betrayal could do to the body. Beside her was Ryan Walker, handsome, confident, his arm around her waist like a promise. Everyone once believed he would marry her. Everyone once believed Grace and Ryan were one of those couples who had already found their ending early. But 7 years later, Ryan was no longer just a face in an old photograph. He was standing outside her door, soaked by rain, older, restless, and asking for a child he had abandoned before birth. When Grace opened the door, Ryan did not begin with an apology. He did not ask how she survived the pregnancy. He did not ask how many nights she stayed awake with a crying baby while he built a life with another woman. He did not ask what it felt like to be judged by an entire town while carrying a child and a heartbreak at the same time. He simply looked past her into the house, searching for the boy he had never held, and said, "I came for my son." Grace stood still. She held the door with one hand and the old photograph with the other. For a moment, the past and the present seemed to stand in the same doorway. Then Grace looked at him calmly and repeated the words that had just left his mouth. "Your son?" Ryan thought she was being cruel. He thought she was punishing him. He thought this was the bitterness he had been warned about for years. But Grace was not playing a game. Her voice was too quiet for that. Her eyes carried pain, yes, but not confusion. She looked at him like a woman who had already walked through fire and no longer feared smoke. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reclaim the authority he once had in her life. But Grace did not move. Somewhere upstairs, Noah Miller slept peacefully, unaware that a man outside the door was about to reopen a story that began before he was born. Grace took one slow breath, looked into Ryan's face, and said the sentence that would break open 7 years of lies. "You still don't know, do you? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because this story is not just about a man who left a pregnant woman. It is about the danger of believing the easiest lie because the truth is too painful to face. It is about a woman who carried shame that never belonged to her. It is about a child whose identity was judged before anyone understood how he came into the world. And it is about one medical report that turned a man's accusation back toward him. Ryan Walker returned to Grace's door believing he had a right to claim Noah. What he did not know was that the truth had already started moving toward him. Years before the rain, the hospital records, and the DNA test, Grace Miller and Ryan Walker were the kind of couple people noticed. They lived in a small town outside Nashville, Tennessee, where family dinners still mattered, church gossip traveled faster than news, and everyone knew who was dating whom before the couple made it official. Grace worked at a neighborhood bakery called Morning Table. She arrived before sunrise, tied her dark brown hair back, and spent her mornings shaping dough, glazing pastries, and smiling at customers who called her by name. She was not loud. She was not dramatic. She was the kind of woman people trusted with their children, their secrets, and their wedding cakes. Ryan was different. Ryan knew how to enter a room and make people feel as if they had been waiting for him. Ryan worked in sales for a home improvement company, and charm came easily to him. He could shake a hand, remember a name, tell a story, and make people laugh before they realized they had agreed to whatever he was selling. Grace admired that confidence at first. To her, Ryan seemed full of life. He brought coffee to the bakery when her shift ran long. He held her hand at the county fair. He danced with her in Linda Miller's kitchen while Grace's mother laughed and told them they were acting like teenagers. Ryan made promises easily, and Grace believed them because he looked sincere when he said them. When Linda warned him to take care of her daughter, Ryan smiled and said he was not going anywhere. That promise would become one of the memories Grace hated most. At the beginning, Ryan made Grace feel chosen. He posted pictures of them together. He introduced her proudly. He talked about children as if their future had already been drawn. At a county fair one summer evening, while lights glowed behind them and families moved past with paper plates and laughter, Ryan squeezed Grace's hand and said that one day they would bring their own children there. Grace asked if he truly believed that. Ryan looked at her as if the answer should have been obvious and said, "With you, yes." Grace carried that sentence inside her for a long time. Later, when everything fell apart, she would remember the warmth of his hand, the certainty in his voice, and the painful truth that some people can speak beautifully about a future they do not have the discipline to protect. The weakness in Ryan was not that he did not love Grace at all. That would have made the story simpler. The weakness was that Ryan loved being admired almost as much as he loved being loved. Grace gave him peace, but peace does not always feed the ego of a man who is hungry for attention. Grace loved him calmly. She believed love should feel safe, steady, and honest. But Ryan also enjoyed the bright flash of being wanted by someone new. He liked compliments. He liked women laughing too long at his jokes. He liked the small thrill of knowing he could still turn a head. Grace noticed it sometimes, but she explained it away because that is what trusting people often do in the beginning. They call warnings personality. They call discomfort insecurity. They call evidence overthinking. Then Natalie Brooks arrived at Ryan's workplace. Natalie was polished, confident, and careful with her attention. She had sleek black hair, sharp green eyes, and a way of smiling that made people feel as if she already knew something they did not. She did not chase Ryan openly at first. She studied him. She learned when to laugh. She learned when to praise him. She learned how to make ordinary things sound impressive if Ryan had done them. When he spoke in meetings, Natalie watched him as if every sentence mattered. When he made a small joke near the coffee machine, she laughed like it was clever. When he helped with a client account, she told him he had a gift for leadership. Ryan began to stand taller around her. Grace did not see the change immediately, but Natalie did. At first, Ryan mentioned Natalie casually. She was the new woman from Atlanta. She was good with clients. She was intense, but smart. Then he mentioned her too often. Then, suddenly, he stopped mentioning her at all. That was when Grace began to feel the distance. Ryan's phone started staying face down at dinner. His lunch breaks stretched longer. His late meetings became more common. He changed his password and acted offended when Grace noticed. When she asked simple questions, he turned them into arguments. He told her she was being insecure. He told her work was stressful. He told her she was imagining problems because she wanted drama. Grace was not a woman who enjoyed fighting, so she began to swallow her questions. But questions do not disappear when swallowed. They sit inside the chest and grow heavier. The first message Grace saw was not even the worst one. It came while Ryan was in the shower, his phone lighting up on the kitchen counter while Grace cleared dinner plates. She did not pick it up at first. She tried not to look, but the name appeared clearly on the screen. Natalie. Then the message followed. "I can't stop thinking about last night." Grace stood frozen, a plate still in her hand, the water running in the sink behind her. For a moment, Her mind tried to protect him. Maybe it was about work. Maybe Natalie meant a meeting. Maybe there was an explanation innocent enough to save the life Grace thought she had. But deep down, something inside her had already gone cold. When Ryan came out and saw her staring at the phone, his face changed before his mouth could lie. Ryan did not apologize. That was what Grace remembered most. He did not rush toward her. He did not explain with shame in his eyes. He got angry. He asked why she was touching his phone. He asked when she had become the type of woman who checked a man's messages. Grace stared at him as if she was seeing two people at once. The man from the county fair and the man now using anger to cover guilt. She asked what Natalie meant. Ryan said she was twisting everything. Grace asked what happened last night. Ryan said she was embarrassing herself. The more she asked, the louder he became. By the end of the argument, Grace was the one crying, and Ryan was the one acting injured. That was the first time Grace understood how betrayal can rearrange a room until the wounded person is made to look guilty. 2 nights later, Ryan said he had a late meeting. Grace knew before he finished the sentence that it was a lie. He avoided her eyes, kissed her quickly, and left wearing the blue shirt she had bought him for his birthday. Grace sat in the living room for nearly an hour, fighting herself. She did not want to follow him. She did not want to become a woman waiting in a car outside a building, searching for proof. But love without truth becomes a kind of sickness. Finally, she picked up her keys and drove through town, with her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the road. She saw Ryan's truck outside a small apartment building on a quiet street. Upstairs, one window glowed. Rain had begun to fall softly, turning the pavement black beneath the streetlights. Grace climbed the stairs slowly. Every step felt like a warning. She reached the apartment door and heard laughter inside. Natalie's laughter came first, then Ryan's. Not the polite voice he used at work, not the tired voice he used at home. A relaxed, private voice Grace knew because it used to belong to her. She knocked once. The laughter stopped. She waited. No one came. She knocked again and called Ryan's name. Still nothing. Her hand moved to the doorknob, almost without permission. It turned. The door opened. What Grace saw inside did not need explanation. Ryan stood there, half-dressed, his face caught between shame and irritation. Natalie sat on the edge of the couch, calm, composed, almost satisfied. She did not look surprised enough. She did not look sorry at all. Ryan said, "Grace, wait." But there are moments when the heart stops listening because the eyes have already heard enough. Grace stepped backward into the hallway. Ryan followed her, repeating her name. But Natalie rose behind him and said, "Ryan, don't." That was the moment Grace would remember more clearly than the apartment itself. Ryan stopped. He saw the woman he claimed to love running into the rain, broken and humiliated. And when Natalie called him, he stopped. Grace ran down the stairs, out of the building, and into the wet street. She could barely see. Tears mixed with rain. Her breath came fast. Her mind was filled with the image of Ryan standing in that doorway, choosing not to follow. Then headlights flashed. A horn sounded. The world tilted. And everything went black. When Grace opened her eyes, she was in a hospital room. The lights were too white. Her body ached. Her throat felt dry. Linda Miller sat beside her, holding her hand so tightly that Grace could feel her mother's fear through her fingers. Linda's eyes were swollen from crying. Grace tried to speak, but only one question came out. "Where is Ryan?" Linda looked away, and that answer hurt before the words arrived. Ryan came to the hospital only once. He stood at the foot of the bed, guilty and uncomfortable, like a visitor who had entered the wrong room. Grace asked him why he stopped on the stairs. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Years later, she would understand that silence can sometimes tell the truth more clearly than a confession. The doctors said Grace had been found near the road after the accident. They said a man had called for help. They said she was lucky. But Grace did not feel lucky. She felt emptied out. Parts of that night were missing. She remembered the apartment. She remembered Natalie's voice. She remembered running. She remembered headlights. After that, there were only fragments. A man telling her to stay awake, the feeling of being lifted, the hospital ceiling. At the time, everyone assumed the missing pieces belonged to the accident. No one asked whether there were other missing pieces from another night. No one asked because the story seemed obvious. Heartbroken woman catches cheating boyfriend, runs into rain, gets hurt. That was the version people could understand. It was also the version that kept the deeper truth buried. Weeks later, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She took the test in her mother's bathroom, set it on the sink, and waited while her whole body trembled. When the result appeared, she sank to the floor and cried. Her first thought was Ryan. Even after the betrayal, even after the apartment, even after the hospital, she believed the child was his. The thought hurt, but it also carried a tiny piece of hope she was ashamed to feel. Maybe this would make Ryan come back to himself. Maybe a child would force him to become responsible. Maybe the man from the photograph still existed somewhere beneath the cowardice. Grace called him. He did not answer. She called again. Still nothing. Finally, they met at a diner outside town, where she told him the truth she believed with her whole heart. Ryan did not reach for her hand. He did not ask how she felt. He leaned back in the booth and looked at her with suspicion already prepared. When Grace told him she was pregnant, his face hardened. He asked how he was supposed to know the baby was his. Grace stared at him as if he had become a stranger in the space of one sentence. She reminded him that he was the one who cheated. Ryan said the timing was convenient. Grace said the timing was their life. Ryan said he would not be trapped. Grace told him he knew the truth. Ryan looked at her with a coldness she would never forget and said, "No, I know what you want me to believe." That sentence hurt more than the cheating, because now he was not only denying her pain, he was denying the child. Grace left that diner with one hand over her stomach and the other holding back tears she refused to let Ryan see. Outside, cars moved along the road as if the world had not just changed. A waitress refilled coffee. A man laughed at the counter. Life continued with cruel normality. Grace sat in her car and understood that she was going to carry this baby alone. Not because Ryan was dead, not because he had been taken from her, but because he had chosen absence. When she returned to Linda's house, she opened the small box where she had kept Ryan's old notes and read them one by one. Promises, jokes, future plans, words that once felt like proof. Then she tore them quietly and placed the pieces in a trash bag. She was not destroying love. She was burying the version of herself that still begged it to return. The pregnancy months were harder than Grace ever admitted. Morning sickness came with shame. Doctor appointments came with empty chairs. At work, people whispered between coffee orders. Some believed Ryan had left because Grace must have done something. Some believed the baby was a desperate attempt to keep him. Some said Natalie was more his type anyway. Grace learned that people often judge a woman fastest when they know the least. Linda stood beside her through all of it, driving her to appointments, cooking when Grace could not eat, praying softly when Grace cried at night. At the first ultrasound, the nurse asked if the father would be joining them. Grace looked at the empty chair beside her and said no. When the baby's heartbeat filled the room, Grace cried because the sound was beautiful. She also cried because Ryan was not there to hear it. When Noah Miller was born, the world became both heavier and brighter. The nurse placed him on Grace's chest, and for the first time in months, Ryan disappeared from the center of her pain. Noah was warm, tiny, furious, alive. His little fingers opened against her skin as if he had chosen her back. Grace sobbed with relief. Linda cried beside the bed, whispering that he was beautiful. On the hospital paperwork, Grace paused at the father's information line. She stared at the blank space longer than she wanted to. Then she left it empty. That word followed her home. Empty chair, empty promise, empty place where a father should have been. But when Noah cried at night, when he curled against Grace's chest, when he looked up at her with wide, gentle eyes, Grace understood something powerful. Ryan's absence was real, but it was not stronger than her love. Years passed in a rhythm of exhaustion and devotion. Grace rocked Noah at 3 a.m. while whispering that they would make it somehow. She worked long shifts, saved small amounts, accepted hand-me-down clothes, and learned how to stretch money until survival looked almost like a miracle. Linda helped with everything she could. Grace returned to the bakery, then slowly learned the business side from the owner. She studied pricing, inventory, orders, and customer accounts. Eventually, she saved enough to take over the place and renamed it Grace and Morning. People thought the name was pretty, but for Grace, it was a testimony. Morning meant she had survived nights no one saw. Morning meant Ryan's leaving had not ended her. Morning meant Noah would grow up in a life built by the woman who stayed. Noah grew into a gentle, thoughtful boy with curly dark hair and eyes that seemed to ask questions before his mouth did. At 4, he asked if he had a daddy. Grace sat beside him on the kitchen floor and told him that everyone comes from somewhere. But not everyone has a father who knows how to stay. At 5, he asked if his father knew his birthday. At 6, he asked if his father looked like him. At 7, he asked if his daddy got lost. Grace took his small hand and said, "In a way, yes. But you were never lost to me." She never wanted to poison Noah against Ryan, but she refused to build a beautiful lie that would collapse later. So she gave him truth in pieces, soft enough for a child, strong enough to stand. While Grace was raising Noah, Ryan's life with Natalie was becoming something far different from the victory he once imagined. Natalie had wanted him when he belonged to someone else, but marriage stripped away the thrill. The compliments faded. The control remained. Their home filled with arguments, jealousy, and silence. Then came the one wound neither of them expected. They could not have children. Month after month, disappointment turned into blame. Natalie blamed stress, then timing, then Ryan. Ryan tried to avoid the doctors, but eventually there was nowhere else to hide. At the fertility clinic, he sat beside Natalie while the doctor explained that his chances of fathering a child naturally were extremely low. Further testing suggested the condition had likely existed for many years. Ryan sat there with the medical report in his hand, and suddenly Grace's pregnancy returned like a voice from the past. That report did more than wound Ryan's pride. It reopened every sentence he had used against Grace. "How do I know that child is mine? I won't be trapped. I know what you want me to believe." Those words now sounded different. If Ryan could not father children, then the child Grace carried could not have been his. At first, His mind rushed toward the easiest accusation. Maybe Grace had betrayed him after all. But the memory of her face in the diner would not let that lie settle. Grace had not looked guilty. She had looked destroyed. Then he remembered the night of the apartment, the way she ran, the accident, the hospital, the missing pieces. For the first time, Ryan wondered whether the story he used to protect himself had been wrong from the beginning. Ryan began searching for Noah online. He found a picture from Grace and Morning Bakery, a community fundraiser photo where Noah stood beside Grace wearing a little apron and smiling shyly at the camera. Ryan stared at the boy for a long time. Noah looked like Grace in some ways. But there was something unfamiliar too. Ryan enlarged the image, studying a child he had rejected before birth. He felt jealousy first, then fear, then something that almost resembled grief. Grace had not hidden Noah. She had raised him in plain sight. Ryan had not been kept away. He had stayed away. That realization was harder to face than infertility, because infertility was something that happened to him. Abandonment was something he chose. And now, 7 years later, he drove to Grace's house in the rain, carrying a medical report and a past he could no longer silence. That was how Ryan ended up at Grace's door saying, "I came for my son." But by then, Grace had survived too much to be moved by entitlement. She told him he did not get to use that word because his life had become empty. Ryan said he had rights. Grace told him he had responsibilities first. He threatened court. Grace did not shake. Then Ryan showed her the medical report. He told her he likely could not have fathered children, not now and not then. Grace read the paper and felt the room tilt. For years, she had believed Ryan was Noah's father. Painful as that belief was, it was still an explanation. Now the explanation cracked open. Ryan expected shame. He expected confession. Instead, Grace looked terrified. She whispered, "That can't be right." And in that moment, Ryan began to understand that Grace had not been hiding the truth from him. The truth had been hiding from her too. The DNA test came next. Grace agreed, not because Ryan deserved peace, but because Noah deserved truth. The testing office felt too ordinary for something that could change a life. A cheek swab, a form, a signature, a waiting period. Noah was too young to understand the full weight of what was happening, but old enough to know the adults around him were frightened. Grace tried to smile for him. Ryan stood nearby, restless, pale, and quiet. When the results arrived, Grace asked that they be opened in her attorney's office. Ryan held the paper with shaking hands. The result was clear. Ryan Walker was not Noah Miller's biological father. For 1 second, old suspicion flashed in Ryan's eyes. Then he saw Grace's face. She did not look exposed. She looked shattered. Grace kept saying no, not loudly, not dramatically. Just no, over and over, as if the word could hold the floor beneath her feet. Images began pressing against the locked doors of her memory. A charity event weeks before the accident. Natalie in a red dress, a drink that tasted bitter. Evan Harper smiling too closely. A gold signet ring with a dark stone, a hallway, a room she could not fully see. Then waking the next morning with a headache, Ryan dismissed as stress. Grace had buried those fragments because her mind had given her only what she could survive at the time. Pregnant, abandoned, judged, and alone, she had not been ready to know there was another wound beneath the one Ryan left. But the DNA result had found the door. Now memory was beginning to knock. Grace returned to the old hospital records from the night of the accident. In the folder Linda had kept for years, buried beneath discharge papers and insurance forms, she found the name Daniel Harper. He was listed as the off-duty paramedic who had found her near the road and called for help. The name pulled another memory forward. Daniel Harper had been at the charity event, but so had his younger brother, Evan Harper, a wealthy businessman with a respected name and a polished smile. Evan had donated money. Evan had shaken hands. Evan had worn the gold ring Grace could now see in her mind. And Natalie had been near him that night. When Grace read the hospital note again, the room seemed to close around her. One forgotten record had connected the accident, the charity event, and the missing hours. The truth did not come in one clean confession. It came through pieces. Old photographs from the charity event showed Grace standing near a hallway with a glass in her hand. Natalie was watching from a few steps away. A former co-worker named Madison remembered seeing Grace unsteady that night. She also remembered Natalie arguing with Evan outside near the parking lot. Madison had never forgotten one sentence. Natalie had said, "You need to fix this before Ryan finds out." Those words changed everything. Not before Grace gets help. Not before someone calls the police. Before Ryan finds out. Natalie's concern had not been Grace's safety. It had been protecting the affair, protecting her claim over Ryan, protecting the life she wanted to take from another woman. When Ryan confronted Natalie, she denied everything at first. She said Grace always wanted attention. She said Grace had always known how to look innocent. But Ryan had evidence now. Photos, messages, Madison's statement, the hospital note, the medical report, the DNA result. Finally, Natalie broke. She admitted she knew Grace had been in trouble that night, but claimed she did not know how serious it was. She admitted Evan had told her Grace might become a problem. She admitted she stayed silent because she wanted Ryan to leave Grace. Those words exposed the truth of Natalie Brooks. She had not simply entered a relationship and stolen a man. She had seen enough of a woman's danger to know something was wrong. And she chose silence because silence benefited her. Evan Harper was eventually connected to Noah through DNA evidence. That truth nearly broke Grace all over again, but it also gave shape to the fog she had carried for years. Noah was not the product of Ryan's love. He was not proof of Grace's betrayal. He was not a mistake. He was an innocent child born from a painful story, then protected every day by a mother who refused to let that beginning define him. Grace had to sit with that truth slowly. She had to grieve the version of events she had used to survive. She had to understand that her mind had hidden certain memories, not because she was weak, but because she had been carrying more than any one person should have carried alone. And through it all, Noah remained what he had always been to her. Her son, her joy, and the reason morning kept coming. Ryan's apology came too late to repair the years, but it came differently than his old excuses. He met Grace and Noah at the bakery, the place Grace had built without him. He did not ask for fatherhood. He did not demand access. He looked at Noah and admitted that he had failed before knowing the truth, and failed even more by refusing to ask the right questions. Then he looked at Grace and said he lost what he abandoned. Grace listened, but she did not rescue him from his guilt. She told him understanding did not return the years. Noah, older now, told Ryan he did not hate him, but he did not know if he could love him either. He said he was willing to hear the apology because he did not want to carry anger everywhere he went. That was the beginning of Grace's peace. Not revenge, not reunion. Peace. She did not allow Ryan to take the front row of a life he had abandoned. She did not allow Natalie's regret to demand her comfort. She did not allow Evan's blood to define Noah's soul. She allowed truth to stand where lies had stood. And then she kept living. Years later, When Noah graduated, Grace sat in the front row with Linda and Daniel Harper, the man who had once saved her life and later became part of her healing. Ryan sat quietly behind them, clapping with tears in his eyes, knowing his place. The woman who stayed deserved the front row. The woman who carried the child, answered the questions, paid the bills, survived the whispers, and built a life from broken pieces deserved to see her son walk into the future without shame. So when people ask what the shocking secret was, the simple answer is that Ryan Walker was not Noah's father. But the deeper truth is harder to forget. Ryan came back to claim a child and discovered that his accusation had been built on ignorance. Natalie fought to take a man and helped hide a truth that should have saved Grace from years of shame. Evan Harper's respected name could not protect him forever. And Grace Miller, the woman everyone judged too quickly, became the only person in the story who loved Noah without condition from the very beginning. She did not need Ryan's return to become whole. She had already become whole in the years he was gone. The question this story leaves behind is not only whether Ryan deserved forgiveness. It is whether a person who abandons you in your darkest season has any right to return when the truth finally exposes them. Would you forgive him? Would you let him near the child? Or would you do what Grace did? Give him the truth, keep your peace, and refuse to hand him the front row of a life he chose to miss. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe for more emotional true storytelling documentaries about betrayal, hidden truth, family secrets, justice, and the quiet strength of people who survive what was meant to break them.